Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson, and it is time for some absolutely egregious self-promotion because your boy made it to Fangoria.com. My first ever piece of writing for Fangoria popped up on their website last week. It is a feature interview with friend of the show, Haley Piper, talking about her new novel, A Game in Yellow, which is out August 12th, which is my birthday. If you want to get me a birthday present, don't get me a birthday present. Get Haley a birthday present and pre-order the book on my behalf because I can only buy so many copies. Anyway, how'd you like that run-on sentence, everybody? Anyway, profiled, featured, interviewed Haley Piper for Fangoria.com talking about A Game in Yellow and its long legacy of cosmic horror that it's picking up, going back 135 years to Robert W. Chambers. It's, I think, a very fun read. It gives you a lot of insight into how Haley put together this amazing book, and we do not spoil the book for you because it's not out until next month. So head over to Fangoria.com, read that article, support Haley, support me, because the more y'all click on that thing, the more likely they are to let me do more stuff over there. It is an honor to have a byline on Fangoria in any capacity, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Beyond that, I am virtually attending the Fantasia International Film Festival for the next couple of weeks, checking out all the wild genre goodness they do up there in Montreal, or at least the parts of it that they let virtual press attendees see. I watched a really fun movie the other night called Hold the Fort. I'm about to watch Mother of Flies, the new film from the Addams Family, and I absolutely love their movies. So I'm excited. If you happen to be attending Fantasia as well, and you see something that you think I really got to see, drop me a line. I'm going to try to watch as many of these things as I can until the first weekend in August when they kick us out of there. That's enough of me rambling. We have a great guest this week. Wendy N. Wagner is here. She is going to talk to us about her amazing new novel, Girl in the Creek, and her work as the editor at Nightmare Magazine. But we're also going to talk about a brilliant Stephen King short story, and that is always a fun time. So let's head over right now to our interview with Wendy N. Wagner. Joining us this week on The Scares That Shaped Us is a writer and editor who is one of the most important voices in modern horror. She is the Shirley Jackson Award nominated author of books like The Secret Skin, The Deer Kings, and An Oath of Dogs, and the editor-in-chief of Nightmare Magazine. Her latest book, Girl in the Creek, is available now everywhere books are sold. Wendy N. Wagner, welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And what an amazing intro that was.
I'm so happy to have you. Like, I've been aware of your work, especially through Nightmare, for a really long time. And when you reached out about Girl in the Creek arcs being available, I was like, yes, this is a good opportunity to talk to Wendy. And I want to start with Girl in the Creek because this is a really cool eco survival horror, almost sort of cosmic-y thing. It's a nice blend of different subgenres. But for anyone who doesn't know yet, could you let us know a little bit about Girl in the Creek?
Sure. Well, it's the story of a woman who decides she wants to break into true crime writing. And so she's looking into missing people in the Mount Hood National Forest, which is a place where her own brother vanished 5 years earlier. And she sets out with a group of friends to do like the first fact-finding trip for this project. And while they're out in the woods, they find the body of a young woman in a creek. And then the really weird thing about this dead girl is that for she vanishes from the morgue, and her fingerprints begin to appear at crime scenes, where also mysterious mushrooms begin to spring up that not even the local expert can identify. And it just kind of gets weirder from there.
Yes, it does. It gets very weird, and it gets weird quickly, which I appreciated. You introduce in the opening of the book, like it's right there at the top. that we are dealing with this woman Erin and her friends are going out hiking, looking at various places around Mount Hood, and then you have this thing called the strangeness, which
Yeah.
is influencing and changing the natural world in that same area in ways that are uh not necessarily malevolent. It doesn't feel it feels very sort of it's very atmospheric and evocative, and you are immediately on this course of how are these two things going to collide, these hikers and this strangeness in the woods. So because you're running these parallel narratives in the early part of the book without giving too much away about how they collide, what part of this came first for you? Was it the true crime writer in the woods, or was it the strangeness? How did it work?
Well, the book took a long time to write and a long time to figure out. Actually, in some ways, there was a scene which actually became chapter two of the novel. Like that, I had gone out like driving along the Clackamas River and we like stopped and we're at this picnic area, just like looking at the river, having this peaceful, beautiful time. And I came back and wrote this creepy vibed version of what we'd just done. And I knew that the narrator in that creepy vibe scene was gonna be the main character of like my next novel, and it was gonna have something to do with the woods, and it was gonna have something to do with Clackamas River, but I didn't know anything about that person. And it took me several stabs to try to like really sort out what was going on with her. And so like I threw out, I don't know, like half of a book twice working on this before I finally found this access point because I also knew I wanted to write a book about weird and creepy fungal entities just because like I love that stuff so much. I mean, I've lived in the Pacific Northwest my whole life and it's a mushroom lover's paradise.
Mm-hmm.
So I just like really wanted to write something like that. But also figuring out what was special and unique about this fungus took a long time too. First, I thought maybe it was, going to go in this very gothic direction. And then I read Mexican Gothic by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. And I was like, I think we need to do something else with these mushrooms. Yeah, so it took a little while, and then once I got the idea, I knew that I wanted the voice of the strangeness to be, well, really strange. And I
Mm.
wanted it to also really capture because so the strangeness is sort of made up of like all these different animals, and I mean there's even plants and people who are caught up in its web. Um, and so I wanted to give the voices that we hear like a real organic, like I'm a real person, I'm a real coyote, that kind of feeling. And but I also wanted to capture the fact that they have been absorbed into this kind of different mind with its own agenda. And I was a little anxious about how I was going to come up with that. So I just like powered through. I wrote the whole human side of the story first, and then I went back and figured out, well, where can I insert these points from the strangeness's point of view? Where will that elevate the tension, but also what creatures and what people are going to be like the most fun for me and that I feel will be
Mm-hmm.
the most effective. But that actually, like that part of the story, that for me was the best part. Like I'm like, this feels great. I loved it.
I love the voices that you get into because the prose when we're following Aaron uh is very Aaron centric. It does not feel like we're doing some sort of complete omniscient pullback from a person. It feels like we are in Aaron's head. This is how Aaron thinks and feels. The strangeness is the prose is more fluid and more uh I don't want to say, well, purple is probably the wrong word, but it's more luxurious, whereas Aaron is very much thinking, like you said, like a human being. Um, did you look at any particular pieces of favorite fiction in order to sort of work out the transitions for your own writing voice between the strangeness and the regular human people that are embroiled in the story?
No, but I think a big influence on this book was probably maybe more structurally than vocally, is Richard Powers' The Overstory, which
Mm.
is a really great work of literary fiction, eco-fiction, and it has many different points of view characters, and each POV is very distinctly flavored, and the way it comes together is incredibly satisfying. So I think, I had read that a couple of times, so I think it was a big influence. I mean, he's a genius and I'm a mortal, but but yeah, I think that was a huge influence on me for that project.
I know that you are, like you said, lifelong PNW resident, and I know that you're a nature person. You spend a lot of time outside. And so I don't want to ask you too much about like research into the natural world because you clearly know the natural world where you live. I did want to ask about mushrooms and fungus a little bit from your perspective because they are, especially in the last 5, 10 years, they're such a focal point in so many horror stories. And The Last of Us is probably the most famous, but you know, you mentioned Mexican Gothic. There's that in Mexican Gothic. Zach Thompson, who's a horror comic book writer, has written several things dealing with mycology and things like that. And obviously, Jeff Vandermeer has done all of his stuff with the natural world shifting, and I see, I think it's very obvious to anybody why eco horror is hitting us so hard right now because of just the way the planet is veering. But why do you think that mushrooms and fungus are such a fertile ground for horror stories?
Well, I think looking at the history of horror, fungus has always been really riveting and fascinating to horror writers. I mean, there's a lot of fungi that appear in Edgar Allan Poe's Fall of the House of Usher, which then we see in the retelling that T. Kingfisher kind of did. Well, it's not really a retelling, but inspired by. And of course, H.P. Lovecraft had the fungus from Yugoth. And so there's like, I think, a long history of like fungal mycelium wending its way through the horror genre. But I know that when I was first really getting into horror in the early 2000s, there was this huge trend. You could not go anywhere without running into a zombie, right? And it was also coincidentally a time when like a handful of really big science related things about fungi kind of came out. One was just like really the public learned about the cordyceps virus that can infect ants and influence their mental landscape, which was, I think, something that radically shifted our understanding of the way other entities can affect our inner landscape. And of course it got really blown up because it kind of came out at the same time. We became interested in zombies, and obviously that's where the origin story for The Last of Us kind of comes from. And so there's that in the background. At the same time, Paul Stamets, who's kind of like a legendary mycologist slash mushroom evangelist, he was really pushing a lot of information about the way that mushrooms and fungi can be used for landscape restoration, while at the same time really pushing the use of fungi. Turkey tail is maybe one of the most well known for this, but reishi, golden mane, all those mushrooms for health.
Yeah.
So mushrooms became very much a part of like the health and wellness field in the United States. But also, I think there is, I think, because we're looking, we're really confronting the fact that we may be facing down apocalypse in many ways, right? Like here in the Pacific Northwest, every day we're talking about, oh, what are we going to do when the Cascade subduction zone like blows up and it's a big one and we like fall into the ocean and everything, our society is ruined. And we've got climate change and we're seeing like giant storms all the time. And I feel like more people nowadays are dealing with destruction and chaos up close and personal. And one of the things that comes in on waves of whenever something gets destroyed or died, fungi comes in because it's like nature's great cleaner upper. So I think one, a lot of people want to see things cleaned up. And two, we're seeing more destruction and we're just getting to see more mushrooms. And yeah, so I think there's a lot of things going on where fungi is just really a potent expression of change. And there's just a lot of interest in it for tons of reasons.
Yeah, it does have that death and rebirth thing going for it, which is always potent. And I mean, I'm in Central Texas. We just had another round of flooding yesterday. So yeah, it's definitely on everyone's minds, and I love the way you deal with it in Girl in the Creek. But I also want to ask you a little bit about Nightmare Magazine, one of the best horror fiction publications out there. Over and over again, you work with so many amazing writers and put out so many great things. Um, and I want to ask what might be a bland question, but I think could be an interesting springboard because like so many people out there, I am a horror fiction writer working on short stories and looking for ways to submit them in the world. Nightmare isn't open for submissions a lot because you get a lot of high demand writers, but as an editor right now in 2025, what are you looking for in terms of good horror short fiction? What is speaking to you most?
Sure. Well, you know, I I know there are a lot of magazines that like either have a tight theme or have a long list of things they never want to publish. Like Clark's World's kind of famous for that, right? We're not like that. We'll publish a vampire story even when people say, "Oh, vampires are done." We'll publish zombie stories, and though people are like, "Oh, zombies aren't relevant." We love all the monsters, we love all the tropes. What we want to see is rich, compelling prose that is manifested deeply from the human condition and new perspectives on the human condition. So, like when a story comes to me, often within the first paragraph, I can get like a taste of the story. Like if the writer has like fully invested in the character, in the narration, and that's what I'm looking for. And that's like what will get me to keep reading more and more. And I think it's a hard skill to develop as a writer. Many of us kind of we are very focused on, oh, this is how to make a story. This is how it works. Here's how to make a nice sentence. Um, but if the story elements, the character, the motivation, the like what's at stake elements, if those aren't like welded into the what makes a nice sentence elements, like if those things aren't really stuck together, like they're two sides of a coin that are inseparable, then your story is not the right story for me. Um, and it's like it's a hard concept, I think, to explain. Like,
Yeah.
sure, I'll publish just about anything, but I'm looking for something specific at the same time.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think part of what you're saying goes back to something that I we talk about on this show a lot, which is the importance of sincerity in genre fiction. Um, I think
I,
that I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say another thing that we're always looking for at Nightmare, because we're also, as well as we like to publish, really moving and like nuanced and so like meaningful pieces. We also really enjoy pieces that are just an absolute blast to read.
Mm,
So like you kind of can't go wrong by having kind of a totally bonkers story or totally gross or totally wild. One thing that I will say that I never get enough of at the magazine is like, because we are the sister magazine to Lightspeed, which does speculative, like sci-fi and fantasy. So I think most people think of us strictly as like a speculative horror realm. But I do love a good, like, just really, if you write a really effective serial killer story,
mm.
like, we're a great market for that, but we don't hardly ever get just like straight, like, psychological or murdery kind of stories as well. And
Interesting.
I hope to open to submissions in the winter.
Oh, cool. Okay. So everybody polish up your stories because Wendy will open it back up and you can submit to one of the best how many Stoker nominations did y'all get this year? I know it was at least one.
I think we had just one this year,
Oh, just one? Was
but
it
I can't remember.
the poetry one? Is that what I'm
No, it was 10,000 crawling infants, something like that, by R.A. Busby.
oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it was
Okay.
a really just completely revolting, horrible story if ever I read one.
So, yes. Nightmare Magazine, always fun to read, always hopeful that you're a great cultivator of new writers as well as seasoned ones. Um, Speaking of short stories, we're going to pivot over to the story that Wendy brought, which it was funny when you said, "I hope that it's okay that I want to talk about this," because one of the funny things about this show so far is for the first, I think, 6 or 7 months of our lifespan, in asking people for formative horror stories in their lives, no one was picking Stephen King anything. Everyone was like, and I think part of that is there are whole podcasts that are just about King, but I also think that people were like, well, that's obvious. I'm not going to talk about Stephen King, but it is so clear every time he gets brought up that he is so formative to literally all of us, whether we know it or not. So this is really fun that we're doing more Stephen King stuff. Anyway, we're going to talk about The Raft, everybody. A legendary Stephen King story collected in Skeleton Crew, his second anthology of short fiction, originally published either in Atom magazine or the Twilight Zone magazine. There are differing accounts of where it got published when, but this is a story that was famously adapted to film in Creepshow 2, written by King himself and directed by George Romero. Wendy, what do you remember about your first time experiencing The Raft, and why did you want to bring it to us today?
Okay, well, it's an unforgettable experience. I grew up in an extremely small town. I mean, town might be a strong word for it. There are about 60 people who live in our community, and it was a very remote place, but it was at the end of a very popular lake with like camping and lots of like when they became invented, jet skis and like, speedboats and things like that. So a lake and, a swim raft, like that was just like, that was my day-to-day experience of life. That's like a really normal thing. And so one of the things that we had in our lives when I was a kid is that every 2 weeks the bookmobile would come and you could check out as many books as you liked. And at the time, my older sister, who's 14 years older than me, she was living at home, as was my next oldest sister, who's 10 years older than me. I was like maybe 8 at this point, 7 or 8. And so we had just gone to the library. I guess I was 8 because it was the summer, right? So we'd been going to the lake. And my sister had checked out, my oldest sister had checked out Skeleton Crew. And she told us at like dinner, she was like, I just read the scariest story I've ever read. And my other sister was like, "Oh, what's it about?" She's like, "This story is called The Raft." And everybody in the family was like reading it. And I was kind of old enough. Like my parents didn't really have any rules about what I could read or what I could watch, but I was old enough to know that like other kids were not allowed to read Stephen King. Like that Stephen King was like he was like the scariest thing. And my very oldest sister was the kind of sister who's like, Wendy, I'm going to put you in the washing machine and pretend to turn it on, or she'd jump out at me and chase me and pretend she was a vampire and then bite me really hard and like laugh. She kind of made my childhood a living hell.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
because she loved to see me be scared. And so I was like, well, if this scares her, I should read it. Because if I can be like, that's not so bad, then I will be like, haha, sister. And so I like sneak the book out of the book box and I like read the story. And it like blew my mind. It was like, this is amazing. This is so cool. And I think part of like, I mean, there's a lot going on in that story. I've reread it as an adult, and it's one of those things that like I'm kind of impressed that I stuck with it because it is, I think, at the beginning kind of like it could be like a story in the New Yorker or something, right? It's very, very focused on the characters. It's kind of boring college student kind of adulty kind of world, and then they get to this swim raft and horrible things begin to happen. And there's this really magical blend, I think, of just absolute awfulness. And there's the main character is like really drawn, like he's sort of pulled in by there's something weirdly beautiful about the gooey gunk that starts to come up in the raft and like eat his friends. And I think it's funny because I think that has actually like left its imprints deeper on me than I know because I think about like Girl in the Creek as like, oh, there's a lot of scintillating color and magical, wonderful stuff going on and being very drawn to like darkness and awfulness while registering that it's dark and awful. And I finished it and I was like, I don't know. That was scary, but it wasn't like so scary. It's not as scary as my sister. And then that feeling like was so great that it like turned me into like a little horror junkie for like I until like probably age I don't know, when I started high school, I kind of was like moved into like I only really devour a lot of like science fiction and fantasy, but because I fell in love with Frank Herbert. But the period between like 8 and 12 or 13 was just like I could not get enough. Like I loved Dean R. Koontz. Like I would have probably, you know, given him my allowance. I didn't get an allowance. I would have given him all my babysitting money if he'd asked me for it. And I loved Stephen King and I loved Charles Grant. And it just like I just was like I couldn't get enough of those pulp paperbacks.
I will say that we're not talking about Dean Koontz today, but I will say if you're getting into the world of Dean Koontz and you go to like a used bookstore and look around, the ones with the R in the middle, real ones know those are the bangers.
Yeah,
Back
it's
when he
so
was still
fun,
Dean R. Koontz, he was
right?
ripping.
Yeah, it's funny because like I have had interviews where like in print where like I've talked about my love for Dean R. Koontz and like people will try to change that. I'm like, no, no, no. Like back in the day when they
Back
were
in the
Dean
day.
R. Koontz books, like that, like he rebranded.
He did, and not to throw shade at any of his like modern psychological thriller work or any of that, but I think I forget who was on the show and we talked about this a little bit, or maybe I was just talking to someone else in the horror world, but we were talking about like no, the real good Dean Koontz is stuff like Lightning and the House of Thunder and Darkfall and
Yeah.
those like crazy high concept horror stories that he was doing. Those rule. But um getting back to the Raft, this is interesting because I also grew up in a very small uh my post office code was different. My zip code was different from where I actually lived because that was just the nearest town.
Hey,
But
that's same for us.
yeah, the nearest post office was that. But we lived in like a little very rural community of, just a few houses around us. But about a mile away from us there was a Christian summer camp, which for a while was owned by people we knew. Like I went to school with the kids, and the dad was actually the preacher at our church, and so we would get invited. They had a lake, and we would get invited occasionally to go out and canoe the lake or swim or whatever. And they had a swim raft, which for those of you who don't know and maybe haven't seen Creep Show, it's exactly what it sounds like. It is a floating dock in the middle of a body of water. And some of them are tethered to the main dock by long lines, and others are just anchored. And the one in the raft is just anchored basically. Um, but yeah, swimming out to that thing and then kind of looking around you and sort of realizing it doesn't seem very far, but once you get out there and you stand up on it, you go like, wow, okay. It's actually like if something happened to this, it would actually be kind of far away for people to get to me and help me. Like if I hit my head or something. And it's just such a fascinating little piece of like kid adventure to go out and swim out to a raft and get on top of it. Um, and like you said, this story opens very much as like it could be a romance, it could be a love triangle story, and it kind of is a love triangle story. But it's four friends: Randy, Deke, Laverne, and Rachel are going out. It's October. It's almost Halloween, and they have decided they're going to go out to this lake on a whim because they got a little drunk and swim out to this raft. And I believe it's Randy that explains it as like it's like the last little bit of summer that's still out there and hasn't been cleaned up yet. So we can go have a little summer here in October and then go about the rest of our fall. And they go out there, and it's so deceptively simple. And it's one of the great King stories because it's so deceptively simple. It's just four college students. They swim out to this raft. It's cold. It's getting dark. There's a monster in the water.
Yeah.
And yet it is this remarkable, like, because it is framed that way, because we get those opening pages of like, these kids are just trying to recapture a little bit of summer. They're trying to have some fun before they have to go back and do their schoolwork. It is very much like an Innocence Lost horror story
Yeah.
in a lot of wonderful ways. So I want to talk about the monster itself, which Randy describes as an oil slick at first. They all think it's an oil slick, but it's a fixed. This is one of the great things about King is the way he builds this because Randy we're told is a nerd and is kind of into he takes science classes. He goes on geology field trips. He's rescued baby animals who got trapped in oil slicks on the coast before. He knows all about that stuff. And he, like you said, he is studying this thing. He is so fascinated by the idea that there's this black shape on the water that isn't changing size and isn't doesn't seem to be tethered to anything and is slowly moving toward them. Um Did you like, were you able to go back? You said you weren't that scared by this. Did you have sort of the same fascination with it that Randy did? Were you able to go back out on the lake after reading this?
Oh, absolutely. Like, even as a kid, I was the person who ruins like, oh, as an example, I like ruined the movie The Birds for my husband because like we're watching it and I'm like, oh, but they're so cute. I love them. Maybe the birds should win. They're just hungry, And like I'm the person that's like, I don't know. I think the xenomorph is, kind of adorable and has so I'm always like, I love the monsters so much because I just see them as animals who are like doing their thing and maybe should like, we should think about things from their points of view. So I think there's a little bit of that going on. And I think also like it is just Stephen King's creature is so fascinating. And I know that I would be like Randy and be because I think that is a little bit of the part what the story is about is the contrast between Randy and Deke and like people who are compelled to action versus people who are compelled to curiosity. And like I'm a curious person and Deke is not. And yeah, so I think like Randy, it's the kind of thing where it can be dangerous to be too curious and
Hmm.
finding the right balance between those two things that is but in a Stephen King story, you're still not gonna win.
Yeah, well, it's all unfolding more or less from Randy's point of view, which is uh, a fascinating headspace to be in because like this was his idea basically. He was the one who told everybody. I was on a field trip a couple weeks ago and the raft was still out there. I bet it's still there. And then but during all of this, like he and Deke are best friends. They have nicknames for each other that are a bit racially insensitive, let's say. But that it was the 80s or the 70s whenever he wrote this story. So we'll move on from that. But they're best friends, but it's very clear that Randy is insecure about Deke because Deke is the jock. He is handsome, he is athletic. He to the point that like they go out and they're taking their clothes off to get in the water, and King makes sure to mention that when Deke takes his pants off, he never stops running. Like he is pulling his jeans off mid stride, and Randy can't do that. And I think he says something like Deke makes it look like ballet. And
Yeah.
so even then, Randy is just like, this guy is just so cool, and I'm not that guy. And it's exacerbated by uh, Randy's girlfriend, Laverne, is maybe flirting with Deke, is a little into Deke. And there's a great moment in the story when I reread it last night. I'd forgotten about this, where Randy is trying to sort of make his peace with this awful situation they're in, and he reminds himself like, I like Laverne a lot, and I think she's really attractive, but I'm not in love with her because I wouldn't bring any girl I'm in love with near Deke, which is such a and uh I'm gonna put a pin in that and come back to it because I just love the way that this slowly reveals itself. It's not that slow, but just like you said, it's this curiosity thing because, if you're in the middle of a lake, if you're on a boat or on a raft or even just standing on a dock and you see something out in the water, I think I would also be the person just being like, huh, wonder what that is.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Oh, it's moving. How is it moving like that? Okay. And I'm sure now, if this story took place in the present day, there would be all sorts of smartphone videos and pictures of it. But it emerges as this strange phenomenon. And even as it floats up close to them, it does the thing that you referred to earlier, which is it shows these amazing colors because it's just black goo, but it's able to sort of prismatically create like whirls of color around it. And Rachel is even more curious than Randy because she kneels down at the edge of the raft and reaches for it because she's just like, what it, the colors are so interesting. And she starts to reach in, and of course, it grabs her and pulls her down. And this is, excuse me, this is in Creepshow 2. It's very gross and very fun to watch in like a gore hound practical effects way, but it does not do justice, I don't think, to the way King describes what happens to a human body when it encounters this thing, which is basically like it dissolves you. It is eating you, but in a way that like it doesn't chew you. It's like a pitcher plant. It just breaks everything down. And imagining the dissolving of you as you're taken in by this thing is such a creepy fun feeling, but at the same time it gives you that like, how does it do that? What's it
Yeah,
made of? Why? What ecologically? Because that's the other fun thing, and this like leads us back to Girl in the Creek, I think, is that it is this eco horror thing of like, this is a well-known lake. They have gone there many times. They all know it. They know about the raft. They've swam in this lake. The only difference is they are going out there in late October rather than like Labor Day. And there's this thing on the water, and it's like, well, did it migrate to the lake? How did it get there? And it's, King doesn't give all of that away. Like, we get no explanation for this thing whatsoever, but it's so laced with these really fascinating details. And in that way, like, it is very much that innocence lost thing of like these kids trying to claw something back that they can't ever get back, which is that whatever magical summer they're remembering. And there's this thing there that's like, no, you can't have that back.
right.
There's
It's
no
like,
way.
oh, yeah. I think it kind of is a good story to pair with it in that regard, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like, I think many of us have those, they're both you can't go home again kind of stories
yeah.
where it's like when you return to the territory of your youth, you see like how it was built on misunderstandings, and that maybe there's like some horrible stuff underneath the surface that you just didn't understand because you were a kid.
I think this is very interesting too in the way that Erin is depicted in Girl in the Creek, because she is simultaneously trying to move forward with a new creative project in her life, but she's also clinging to the mystery of what happened to my brother. Can I by doing this achieve two goals, which is to, and Randy's doing that too. Randy's like, if I do this with everybody, I'm going to appear cool, and maybe my girlfriend won't leave me for my best friend. Uh, and Erin's is much heavier, but she's like, if I do this with my friends, I could find a new story to grip me and make me want to tell these stories as a journalist. But also, like, what if I could actually figure out what happened to my brother?
Yeah.
And I love the parallels there. It also reminded me, rereading it, of a Shirley Jackson story called The Summer People,
Oh yeah, that's wow, that's
which is,
I it's been a while since I read that, but wow.
it's not a story about young people. It's a story about like adults with lives and jobs and things. But basically, it's these people go every summer and stay in a vacation home in this like idyllic little community. And one year they just where they're like, well, we don't have anything going on. Why don't we just stay? Like, we'll just stay here for September. Like, it's fine. And all of the townspeople start going, you're gonna stay? That you probably shouldn't stay. No, I don't think you should stay. I don't think that's a good idea. And everyone's like, well, what are you talking about? We can pay for the house. We're fine. No, I don't think you should stay. And I don't want to say anything else about that story for anyone who
Yeah.
hasn't read it, but The Summer People is one of my favorite Shirley Jackson joints. It's amazing and creepy, and it has that same like, you're trying to hold on to something that has passed you by, and you're now going to pay a price for that.
Yes. Which
Uh,
is also makes me think like, oh, that I kind of can't help but wonder if that was a little bit of an inspiration for Bag of Bones, right? Like,
Yeah.
which is also about people who buy a summer house and then maybe they shouldn't stay.
Yes. Well, and this like takes me into I was talking to Stephen Graham Jones about we talked about Friday the 13th part 7 uh and it was we talked about it after Angel of Indian Lake came out, and we talked a lot about the inherent eerie quality of lakes, um
Right?
and the sense of the unknown that they provide, because an ocean is huge and has a lot of dangerous things in it. But generally speaking, if you go underwater in the ocean, if you have goggles on and it's daytime, you can pretty much see what's in your vicinity. Uh, that's not the case with lakes, at least not most lakes. Like there are
Yeah.
some famously very clear lakes, but the lake I grew up swimming in was very sort of dark green and murky, and you would occasionally do that daring kid thing of like, how deep down can I swim? And
Yes.
it was always like playing chicken with the bottom of the lake. I don't actually know how deep that lake was. I don't know if it was possible for me to swim all the way down, but it was just this thing of you would look down and it would just get darker and darker, and you would finally go, oh no, I can't do this anymore, and pop
Yeah.
back up. um
The lake where we grew up, for one thing, it had just tons of lake weed, which added
yeah.
to like the creepiness as it's touching you. But it was very famously like studied by like some geologists sent in like scuba divers at some point in like the early 80s because it was the kind of lake that was formed when a massive rockfall blocked a creek.
Mm,
So it was a valley that had been forested. So like they had gone down to like take samples of and see like measure the rate of the decay of like the forest that was at the floor. So then from there, there was like all these like, legends like, oh, if you go out at the right time in a boat in the right place, you can actually see like the trees down below. Like there's still a forest down there standing there. You
yeah.
could yeah, like so it was like there was always like a little spooky element in that lake.
I love those. I love the stories of lakes that are like, there's a town down there. Like if you
Right.
just if you just swim down, like, I'll never do that because I'm not that brave, but it's
I've read that book by Josh Mallerman,
yeah, yeah, the house at the bottom of the lake. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um so this just sort of popped in my head, which I find interesting in part because I grew up on land in Texas where we also had a creek running behind our house. It was actually a creek that fed into the lake. Um, and but it was on our property, so we could just go down to that creek whenever we wanted, and it was, in at the right time of year, it was just teeming with minnows and watercress and all this stuff, and it was very magical and fun. And we never saw anything like scary that we were worried about at the creek. So I'm curious, like, how did the book become Girl in the Creek and not Girl in the Lake, or something like that?
Sure. Well, I too grew up with like that exact same thing with going out to the creek and having a great time in the creek and playing and things like that. And that question kind of has two parts. One is plot-esque, and that is that in like the upper elevations, mm, most creeks are fed by springs and glacial melt waters that make them extremely cold. So there's a really nice preservation quality to creeks and rivers up around like mountains. So that's you can see how maybe that could have a good like if you find a body in a swamp, it's probably going to be a lot grosser than if you find a body that's in one of these cold creeks.
Yeah.
And probably that body that's in the swamp is not going to get up and have adventures. So there was just like a natural element of science that was going on a little bit. But also I think something that kind of influenced um, just the placement of the that experience is well, first of all, it's found in like an old town that had a lot of industry like mining and a sawmill, and creeks are great for powering like water wheels.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of conversation in this book about the historical development of the landscape and versus like nowadays, there's a large thrust in like converting communities to recreational uses. So I had like come up with this idea of like that she would be found in this ruined old town. And I
Yeah.
knew that the ruined old town would have been built on a creek and not like a swamp or a lake or something.
Yeah, the ruined old town is one of my favorite things in the book. I loved, as someone who, would find falling down buildings on my grandparents' property growing up and have to explore them, like that spoke to me. And there are some very creepy reveals in that town that I will not spoil for readers, but go get Girl in the Creek if you,
Ah.
especially like if you love eco horror, yes, but also if you love like abandoned exploration of abandoned places and things like that. There's some great stuff in there. But going back to the Raft, I think, and we should say, Skeleton Crew as an anthology is maybe the scariest of King's collections because it has this story in it. It has the Mist. It opens with the Mist, which is amazing. You kick off with a banger like the Mist, and then you keep going. So it opens with the Mist. It has the Raft. It has the Jaunt, which a lot of people consider the scariest King story. It has Survivor Type, which is another incredibly disgusting, but completely non-speculative. It is a realistic, gross story. Uncle Otto's truck is super scary. It's got a lot of amazing. Oh, and the monkey, of course. Yes, the monkey is in Skeleton Crew. We can't forget about that. But I think there is a moment in the Raft which is a contender for scariest thing Stephen King has ever written, and it's what happens when the creature eats Deke, which is depicted pretty true to the way it's described in the on screen and to the way it's described in the story, but not exactly, because essentially what happens is that the creature realizes that they're not all just gonna fall in the water, so it starts to go under the raft, and they eventually realize that if they don't stand on the cracks between the boards, they're okay. They have to stand directly on the boards and not touch the cracks because the thing can reach up through the cracks, but only like an inch. It can't really grab. And but of course they don't know this yet, and it comes up through the cracks and grabs Deke. And in the film, he sort of they it sort of punches a hole in the raft and pulls him down. But in the story, it's dissolving you. So it takes his foot, so his foot disappears, so he falls over, and then it starts to take his leg, and Randy has to watch his best friend die in the most horrible way that I could possibly imagine watching anyone die because and Deke basically, hemorrhages. He bleeds out. That's how he dies. But in the course of all of this happening, his eyes, like blood starts to pour out of his eyes and his mouth and his ears, and he's just hemorrhaging everywhere. And then King describes it as his eyes are still open and his tongue is poking out because this thing is taking him down bit by bit. So it's at one point, Randy just has to look at essentially the severed head of his friend as it's slowly dissolved down between these boards. And then his hand is the last thing left, and he still has his like football championship ring on it. And eventually the ring is the last thing that stays because it can't go between the boards. I made the mistake of reading this story before bed last night,
Oh gosh.
and uh, I've I know this story. I've read it multiple times, but I was not prepared for how unbelievably disturbing Deke's death is. It really, I cannot at the present time think of a passage of King fiction, and I've read most of it, that is scarier than that. It's amazing.
And I think it gets scarier like the older you get and the
Yeah.
more experience you have in the world. Like I think that's part of the reason why I read it as a kid and I was like, "Oh my God, this is awful." But also, I don't think I had all the experiences like with pain and like watching other people suffer to unpack that. So rereading it as an adult was like, "Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. This is this is like so wrenching and horrific." And yeah, I agree with you. I think it's way more like hideous and heartbreaking than I think I've read in anything else by Stephen King.
Yeah, it's just so unbelievably gut-wrenching. And
And it's made more gut-wrenching because, what they're in this time when they're these two best friends who are like the inseparable duo are feeling a schism between each other, right? And there's nothing worse than having something bad happen to somebody that you care about when you're in a fight, right? Like that makes it.
yeah. Yeah, the fact that Randy has this building resentment toward Deke throughout the story, and then to have to watch Deke go through all of that is, oh, it's amazing. But then the story like takes this really interesting turn for me, a tonal turn, because it it is a very satisfying like creature feature story up to that point. But after Deke dies, it becomes Randy and Laverne on the raft together. It's night. It's like 40 degrees outside. They're very cold. They're trying to figure out what to do. And they just eventually fall into this days of maintenance because the creature sort of swims away a few feet away from the raft and is just watching them, and they're watching it. And at one point, like they realize, well, it's far enough away that we could stand up if it was coming, if we're watching it. So why don't you sit down and I'll stand up and watch it, and then after 15 minutes I'll sit down and you stand up and watch it. And then they realize, well, if we're both facing it, we could sit down together, right? And this like remarkably tender thing happens between the two of them, uh, which in the film is depicted differently. In the film, it's basically a sexual assault, the way that Randy goes about it. But in the way King writes it, is they're huddled together on this raft. They're terrified. They're cold. They don't know if they're going to live to see sunrise, and they start to have sex because they can see the thing and it's in the water away from them. And Randy's like, "I'm watching it. Don't worry." And it's just this very like it is another example of clinging to something that you're never going to get back. Where they're just like, if we're going to die, we can have one last moment of like tenderness and fulfillment with each other. And then the thing gets hold of Laverne's hair and starts to pull her down, and it's the most at that point it becomes almost cosmic in its horror because it is just so existentially terrifying that like you cannot have a moment of peace or reflection or warmth because it will rob you of it.
Yeah.
It's so devastating. So and then we get to the ending, and this is the thing, is the ending is different in the film versus the story. And I think because Creepshow has that sort of horror comedy vibe to it, that
Yeah.
they tweaked the ending because it's basically the same story with a few character dynamic tweaks here and there. But in the film, when the thing starts to eat Laverne, Randy sees his chance and swims away and makes it to shore and starts yelling, "I beat you, I beat you, I beat you." And then the thing reveals that it can leap out of the water, and it grabs him and pulls him back in, and so they all die. In the story, Randy watches Laverne get eaten, and we leave him standing on the raft, staring down at this thing, transfixed by its colors, and basically surrendering to whatever this thing has in store for him, which is so much more haunting and frightening.
Right? It is one depressing ending. It is like, man, it's and it's such a contrast to, like I said that when I was a baby writer, I started writing in like the zombie apocalypse glut, right? And those books are so infused with this idea that whatever happens, I can beat it. My strength of character is so much. And this story is such a counter narrative to that. Like it's really a recognition of the way that trauma can just beat you down and erode you and steal yourself from you. And how I don't think any of us are really prepared for that.
It's a common thing in a lot of, well, I wouldn't say common, but it is a recurring thing in King, where a lot of his stories, particularly the novels, they have survivors. They have some of them have reasonably happy endings. People make it, but in stories like this, and in stories like uh, Revival is kind of the big one that sticks out. And there's even the Jaunt has this feeling of like, even if you even if you survive whatever ordeal is about to hit you, the scarier thing is being robbed of who you are.
Yeah, it's such a wise insight into how what life can do to you.
Yes. And like you said, I think it gets scarier as you get older, because it can absolutely read as just like a really creepy monster story.
Yeah.
And you don't have to we pick stories apart on this podcast. That's what we're here for, but you don't have to. You can just read this in an afternoon and go, wow, that was scary. Okay, anyway, back to whatever else I was doing. And Creepshow, the movie, kind of presents it that way. It's one stop on the road of this horror anthology that you're experiencing. But just as The Jaunt is this sci-fi horror thing about what happens when you glimpse the infinite and you're not prepared for it, this is a story about losing who you are because you are trying so hard to recapture who you were, or
Yeah.
who you wish you were.
Yeah.
And oh man, I'm so glad you picked it, because I had I feel like I lost so many of these layers between the last time I read it and now. And now I have this great conversation to kind of memorialize. Uh so we've already talked about it a little bit, but as we wind down here, I want to ask you about the broader impact that this story and Stephen King in general had on your writing. Like it's obvious in certain thematic and tonal things in Girl in the Creek, but what do you feel like King gave you that maybe other horror writers didn't?
Sure. I think, well, first of all, um, after I got done with college, I had taken a little bit of creative writing coursework there, but like also I was a literature minor. And I got done with college with like a very much oh, the only point of writing is to write, the great American novel. And I'd always wanted to write science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And I felt like, oh, well, that's just so stupid. And I really fell out of love with writing. And so when the book came out, a friend who worked at a bookstore gave me a copy of On Writing, which was like a giant permission note to be yourself and write what makes you sing. So just on that level alone, Stephen King is like, kind of the progenitor of like how I became a writer.
Mm-hmm.
But also I mean, like everybody who has read my book, The Deer King, says, it is a Stephen King novel in the Pacific Northwest, right? And I think that is something else that Stephen King gave me, since I read a lot of him early when almost everything was set in Maine and New England, was this feeling like it's okay to have it's great to just let the space around you fill up your well and have that be a major inspiration for you. So for me, writing about the Pacific Northwest is like, it's just what I do. It's like where I take all my inspiration from. It's what I'm most interested in exploring, which, obviously really worked well for him.
Yeah, it's I could say the same thing. Like every piece of fiction I write now is set in Central Texas, basically, because it's what it's and I mean it on the basic level it's a write what you know thing. Like I know the trees here, I know what the weeds look like in the summer, I know how the corn grows, all that stuff, sure, but that sort of hyper locality thing is it's a way of enchanting the landscape because
Yeah. Oh,
you
yeah.
you know it so well, you are able to infuse all these little details, like the way that you write about in Girl in the Creek, the way you write about the green of the Pacific Northwest, and the way that the constant moisture infuses everything and makes everything bubble up with green until you almost can't take it. There's so much green. That's Stephen King writing. That is like I know this place so well that I can impart qualities in it that wouldn't necessarily be apparent if I was writing about, like, I've been to New York City a couple times. I could write a story set in New York City, but it wouldn't have those same touches. You need someone else to write the New York City story that's going to make, Clay McLeod Chapman or somebody could write the New York City story
Right.
that makes sense. So yeah, I appreciate that so much, and it's such a we talk all the time in horror circles about the way that King writes about ordinary things and the way that he is able to bring life to all of that, and like his characters drink Pepsi and smoke Marlboros and all that, and so it feels real to us. Yes, but there's also that other current of, and it's especially, you mentioned Bag of Bones. It's all over Bag of Bones. This idea,
Yeah.
this sort of magic in the landscape. The uh, psychosphere would be another way of framing it. So, this has been a wonderful conversation about the Raft, but you should also go out right now and buy Girl in the Creek by Wendy N. Wagner. It is a fantastic horror novel. It is available as of this recording. It is available tomorrow, but by the time this episode comes out, it will be out everywhere. So go get it. Wendy, before we let you go, can you let everybody know where they can find you online?
Yeah. Well, I have my ridiculously named website, which is winnywoohoo.com. I'm also on Instagram as Wendy N. Wagner, Blue Sky. I don't remember my name on there. And of course, you can find me on nightmare-magazine.com, publishing new fiction every month.
The Blue Sky handle, folks, is wnwagner.bsky.social. If you want to go follow Wendy over there, I do. You should too. Our guest has been Wendy N. Wagner. Wendy, thank you so much for being on the show. It was great talking to you.
This was great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks once again to Wendy N. Wagner for being on the show. Girl in the Creek is available now wherever you get your books. I highly recommend picking it up whenever you can. I also highly recommend reading all of the amazing stuff that they have at Nightmare Magazine in both print editions and on their website. It's a great place to go if you're a horror fan. If you're not already supporting Nightmare Magazine, please go do that in whatever way you can. And if you want to support us, please do me a favor and leave us a 5-star review on the podcasting app of your choice. That will help us get featured more on podcast apps, which will help us raise our level of exposure, which will hopefully raise a whole slew of amazing new horror writers who want to come on this show and talk to me, because I definitely want to talk to them. I will do this show forever if y'all let me. So if you like what we're doing, leave us a review, tell your friends, help us out, help get the word out. We very much appreciate it. You can also follow us on social media. We are right now mostly on Blue Sky. We are at scareshapedus.bsky.social over there. That is where you will find new episodes, announcements of future guests, giveaways. Whenever we do giveaways, we just did a giveaway for Stephen Graham Jones's Killer on the Road / The Babysitter Lives, and I have another giveaway coming up here in just a few days. The only way to enter giveaways and win stuff right now is to follow us on Blue Sky, so make sure you are doing that. We're also The Scares That Shaped Us on Facebook, and we are The Scares That Shaped Us on YouTube. If you prefer to listen to your podcast that way, head over there, like, and subscribe. We put every episode of the show on our YouTube channel. And of course, if you want to drop me a line, if you have a question, something you want to hear me talk about on air, a guest you would like to hear me talk to, you can always email us, scares@gmail.com. We appreciate everyone. That does it for me this week. We will be back next week, July 30th, with a brand new guest who I am not quite ready to announce. So make sure you're following us on Blue Sky, and you will find out before the end of the week who the next guest on the show is. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. I'm Matthew Jackson, and this is The Scares That Shaped Us.